Hi everyone, so this is my, I guess, third non-Ukraine video today. Um, Ukraine is still very much foremost on my mind, but I do want to diversify my content a little bit, and for that reason, I'm going to put other videos out there. Um, One of my subscribers asked if I was going to make another video about um, dating, online dating. I may do that. I'm still doing it. I mean, I'm still on eHarmony, but uh, for this one, I want to talk about my thoughts on life coaches. I'm particularly thinking of the online context, not necessarily, for example, TED speakers, um, teach, educate. I forget what the acronym stands for. But the TED Talks are now well known. People talk on a wide range of subjects. I'll just reposition this actually. There we go. Yeah, so you know, some of the most viewed videos on YouTube are these sort of life lessons, these sort of tips from usually self-described life coaches. Not surprisingly, a lot of them are about the world of dating and the world of relationships. Now, to be clear here, I'm not totally disparaging these people. I think that they tend to be very good speakers. They're eloquent. Um, I think sometimes they do have some background in issues like sociology and actually some credentials for what they're talking about. Um, and they tend to speak in an eloquent and positive way. It's easy to see why they would be inspiring and why they would get a lot of attention. But I do have a slight concern about them, which is that people take their word as gospel truth. Um, and what I would simply say is that nobody, I don't care how clever you are, nobody is perfect. So to me, the idea that a person can sort of hold up and say, this is what you have to do in a relationship, this, and this, or this is what to avoid. It's not to say that they're wrong, but it is based on a premise that they know everything and what works for them or what works for maybe people in general will work for everyone, and that's not always the case. Because the thing is, lonely people or people who lack confidence will invest a lot into this. They will look at these videos religiously, and again, to really emphasize and underscore the point, I'm not saying they're wrong in the things that they're saying. So, for example, if you have a dating coach video, right? And it's men and women do this. They might talk about red flags to avoid, and usually those will be common sense things. Like if the person is controlling, avoid them, or if the person is disparaging others in front of you, things like that. And that's kind of common sense. But my question would be, well, you're a human being like everyone else. Are you honestly going to say you've always had a smooth situation in terms of relationships? So I think there's something a little bit presumptive, dare I say, even condescending about their approach. Um, and people take it religiously. Um, I think it's especially problematic when the sort of tips are based on generalizations, like a one size fits all sort of generalization. Um, I'll give an example, right? And this came up in my previous video where I was talking about Sadiq Khan. Apparently, this word crazy, right? So I came across a video where a guy was talking about giving advice to women about red flags to avoid, and he said if your guy talks about his ex as crazy, that's a red flag. Is it? I'm thinking, well, okay, if he uses that sort of language about women in general, he probably has a problem with women, and he probably has misogynistic inclinations. But the problem with a statement like that is it ignores individual context. Now, what if the guy has had an ex who has been stalking him? or she's really obsessive and won't let it end, or she constantly violates his privacy. And in frustration, he calls her crazy. Um, does that mean he hates women in general? Of course not. It means he's frustrated with this one particular woman who has been giving him a hard time. And of course, it could go the other way. Just because a woman complains about her ex-boyfriend doesn't mean she hates men. So that's just an example. And the video had 500,000 views. So all of the comments were just lapping it up. I put the video, excuse me, I put the comment there. I'll see if he replies. Basically saying what I've just said. Well, look, that might be true if he's talking about women in general, but you can't smear someone as a misogynist just because they use the word crazy by perhaps one person. Um, I mean, it's probably not good to call people names like crazy, generally speaking, but there may well be context there. And I really have a problem with way loaded terms like misogyny are thrown around. Um, life coaches, I think, to me, they would be more sort of motivating to me. I would listen to them more if they, as a starting point, said, I'm flawed, I've made mistakes. But they sort of come from this holier than thou position. Um, so I just find them, I shouldn't generalize, some probably are better than others, but from what I've seen, they tend to be, they're good speakers and they speak in a very eloquent way and they're very positive, but they don't put any sort of premise of their own experience. So, they're throwing all this advice out there. Very rarely do they actually talk about their own experience. Now, to me, that's interesting. I mean, either they're hiding something or they're vain and they think that they've had no problems. Um, don't get me wrong, I think there is a place for motivational speaking. I mean, if someone survived a very traumatic experience and they've survived it and they want to help others to get through it, take for example a woman who survived rape, right? She might want to help other women in that position. So she would talk about her experience and talk about how she dealt with the aftermath. Now, I would never criticize that. I think that is inspiring. Um, or someone who survived some traumatic event, other event, um, maybe some big disaster or a transport accident, or it could be anything, and they want to talk to others to uplift them. Again, there's definitely a place for that. Or if someone has a particular expertise in whatever, physics, ancient history, architecture, you name it, and they want to talk to people and get them motivated and interested in that subject, obviously, if they've studied it and have a background in it, they're going to know more than the average person. Therefore, they have something to talk about. So I'm really am all for that. I might even do it myself one day, but I would only do it if I felt that I really was qualified to do so. And I would hope that I'm not doing it in a way that's patronizing or, I think relating personal experience, is very important, even as a teacher. And this is not exactly the same comparison, but even as a teacher, when I set my students a task, it could be something simple like a little game they were playing, I would always show an example rather than just giving them the instructions. You'd have to show an example. Well, in a not similar way, I would say life coaches, it's great giving people good advice, but I think more of them should talk about their own experience so that people know that they're not just talking down and they're not just being holier than thou, that they too have had struggles, they too have had disappointments, that they too have done things that they're not proud of. Otherwise, it's just like these super positive people that are, be like me, don't do this, don't do that. Um, I just don't quite appreciate that approach. Um, because I think you need to use personal experience. I mean, it's what I try to do. If I ever give advice, and I'm not someone who gives advice without people asking for it, or if I do it cautiously. Like if you don't mind me saying, I don't say that you should do this. But if I do, it will. I'll try and give a context, a personal context, so that I know that, so that they know I have some empathy to go on. Otherwise, it's going to look like I'm interfering, or you know. And the same for me. If someone's telling me how to do something, or they give advice I haven't asked for, well, firstly, I don't really appreciate. Um, perhaps that's masculine pride. I don't know, but I think you have to give some context as to why you're giving advice. Like, well, I had this experience, so if I were you, I would consider this, or I don't know, something like that. But if you just go in there and say you should do this or you should do that, now, of course, the thing with life coaches and the thing with those sort of videos is people seek them out. To be honest, maybe this is an unfair comparison, but it's a bit like those plastic surgeons you hear about in South Korea. They seem to be in that country a lot. By the way, South Korea's in the news. They've got a new president now, who's promised to have a tougher line on Beijing and Pyongyang. That's not here or there, just piece of news. Um, I won't say the guy's name because I'll get it wrong. But yeah, people go to South Korea, young women from across Asia, particularly, go to South Korea, they get surgery for whatever it is. Then they go back to get more because there's some little imperfection, and then there's another little imperfection, and they keep going back, and they spend a lot of money doing so. Um, well, life coaches, perhaps is an unfair comparison because some of their advice genuinely is good. I've heard it and I agree with a lot of things they say. I just have a problem with the premise of, do things exactly this way and you'll never have problems because it's not one size fits all. It really isn't. And you can't take a generic rule and apply it to every case because that ignores individual context. The example about crazy I mentioned is one instance. I mean, that kind of irritated me, to be honest, because he was projecting this idea that if a guy uses that word about a woman, he must therefore be a misogynist. Same attitude Sadiq Khan was coming out with. And that's problematic because women will listen to that and they'll say, oh, well, the guy must be a misogynist if he says something bad about his ex. But maybe he's got a legitimate reason for doing so. Or, maybe he had an abusive mother as a child and therefore he has a bad attitude to women. But in that case, the key thing is to show him that not all women are the same and not to treat all women the same. But again, it's not baseless. There is something there that's motivating that attitude. Um, then, of course, you do get guys who are narcissists and they won't will blame everyone but themselves. To me, that's a red flag with anyone. I would say, and I'm not one to issue advice, but probably a red flag with anyone would be someone who does blame everyone else and they can never utter the word sorry or I was wrong or I shouldn't have done that ever. Um, that to me would be like, yeah. I certainly would be wary of a woman who had that attitude, and I would respectfully say to women watching this, if a guy is very narcissistic and vain, probably, yeah, you should stay away from him. But, again, it's not for me to tell anyone how they should approach a relationship. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. I want to be very clear here in conclusion. I'm not disparaging life coaches. I think probably most of them are decent people, motivated for good reasons. But they're always giving advice to others. I would give some advice and feedback to them. For me personally, as a viewer, I would be a little bit more motivated if you gave some personal context. You're giving all this advice, and that's great. But give us some personal anecdotes that something you went through. And if you're not prepared to do that, then it seems like you're talking from on high. That's just my honest feedback. In the unlikely chance any of them will be watching this, let me know your thoughts.